Welcome back to Civil Wars. I'm William Spaniel, and this is the wrap-up lecture of the course. We are now done, and at this point I just want to go over a few quick points which I think are the most important takeaways from this course, not only in understanding how civil wars work and why they're fought, but also in understanding general phenomenon that are around you, especially in the social sciences. Let's start off with the most difficult obstacle we encountered in this course. That is, making inferences is very difficult, especially when it comes to social science phenomenon. The reason is that in a hard science, you can get randomized, controlled experiments to make things a lot easier for you. So for example, if you wanted to know how effective a drug was, you could get a whole bunch of people to take the drug, and then get a whole bunch of other people to not take the drug, but to take a placebo instead, and you randomly choose who's getting the drug and who's not getting the drug, and by the end of that experiment, you can compare the health of the group that's getting the drug versus the health of the group that's getting the placebo, and then you know that whatever the result is the consequence of taking that drug. Well, unfortunately, we can't randomly assign the outbreak of war in countries. We can't randomly assign where we intervene. We can't randomly assign where we sanction. These sorts of things are so costly and, in many cases, deadly that you cannot have the ability to convince, say, a country to randomly go into a place to intervene or randomly impose sanctions on a particular place. And so as a result, because we don't have this randomization, because there is an active selection process on behalf of whoever is making the action, whether it's an intervention or a sanction or what have you, we can't directly look at the results of that particular outcome and make any sort of solid inference about whether that was actually useful or not. We have to be much more clever in how we go about figuring these things out. And despite this obstacle, I think we've made some progress, which is useful and noteworthy. And I want to begin by noting that a lot of the explanations that we came up with in trying to understand why phenomenon happens the way it happens was by not actively assuming that that result is what we should expect. And I think this is clearest when we're talking about war. Oftentimes, you'll have people explain war as the result of people liking war. This is very unsatisfying. This is like saying, I assume war happens, therefore war happens. So if you ask someone, why did war happen? And it's because war happened. This is a circular argument. It doesn't really give us much use in trying to explain why wars happen and how we can get them to stop happening or how we can improve them or decrease the likelihood of them happening. Better explanations involve people having preferences against what you're trying to study and then still understand why that happens anyway. And we've done this in this course with war and making war costly. So when we've been discussing war, we've been saying that war is costly, it destroys things. So as a result of that, people should have preferences against war. And yet we know that countries and people and rebel groups and governments still end up fighting anyway. And having those explanations why you still fight despite having the deck stacked against fighting is much more useful in trying to figure out how to stop people from fighting or improve war outcomes given that they might be fighting. So the way we went about doing this is by studying bargaining. We learned that bargaining is very, very complicated, and because of there's this strategic interaction where what I do affects my outcomes and your outcomes, and what you do affects your outcomes and my outcomes, and as a result, we need to be anticipating what the other person is doing and strategizing accordingly. Well, we developed these models to track the logic explicitly, so we're not missing out some sort of causal mechanism that takes us from point A to point B. By and large, in this course, we have been using simple models, and simple models are okay. It is not a bad thing to use a simple model. You can't grow out your model into being ridiculously complicated right away. You need to start small, start with the baby steps, and then grow from there. You can't learn to run before you've walked. So we start off with these simple models to learn how to walk. That's what we've dealt with in this class. It's a basic class. It's an undergraduate style class. We're not trying to go way up, way up, way up high. But once you have those basic models down, you can then elevate yourself and learn more and more about this. Unfortunately, you can't do it in this class, but if you want to continue your studies on your own, be my guest. I'd love it if you would do that. Anyway, bargaining does explain why civil war is relatively rare. Because there are these costs of war and because actors, governments, and rebel groups can strategically choose how to shift the status quo into one person's favor, we know that bargaining actually works most of the time, then the costs of war incentivize these parties to reach mutually preferable peaceful agreements, and as a result, civil war by and large is relatively rare, thank goodness. On the other hand, wars do happen every now and then, and we have a decent explanation for why these things happen. Really, there are two different forms of reasons to fight wars instead of having those peaceful bargains, which could be mutually preferable. The first problem is what's known as an information problem. This is the risk-return trade-off, where we saw that even perfectly intelligent people can overestimate their chances in war, and when you're doing that, you might be too aggressive at the bargaining table, and that will cause the other side to reject your offer and fight a war. The good news, though, is that fighting, while being bad, also stops fighting from happening further. If fighting happens as the result of an information issue, where I don't know something that's important about the outcome of war, by fighting we learn more about each other, and then that allows us to resolve the fighting off of the battlefield. So war is actually good at stopping war. It's kind of ironic, but nevertheless, it's true. The other reason why wars can occur is as a result of commitment problems. In these commitment problems, everyone might realize that peace is better for everyone, but the future temptation of one party after, say, a power shift has occurred means that the other party that's going to be facing that disadvantageous power shift in the future is going to want to fight to prevent that power shift from occurring. So as a result, you get conflict despite the fact that no one wants it actively in these sorts of situations. We've also seen how costly signaling can resolve both informational issues and commitment problems, where if I'm concerned that you're not someone who's truly committed to the issue, and I might want to take a negative action if you weren't committed to the issue, you can waste money, you can burn money, you can spend money just not getting anything but, say, dumping it in a river or setting it on fire to show how much you care about the issue, to convince me that you're someone who cares about the issue, and then that will cause me to back down. You'll deter me by lighting that money on fire. As a result, you can spend some money to save some money in these sorts of cases. And that's neat. I really do think that if you missed out on that costly signaling lecture, you should go back to it because it's a very important lecture in understanding all sorts of social science phenomenon. Moving on, variance. We've talked a lot about how you cannot explain variance with a constant. If your explanation for war is ethnic diversity in your country, well, there's a problem here in that ethnic diversity doesn't really change very much over time. So if you're explaining war in your country as the result of ethnic diversity, you're also explaining peace in your country as a result of ethnic diversity, and that doesn't make very much sense. To explain variance, you need variance in your independent variables as well. Lastly, you cannot select on the dependent variable. We talked about this at most in the context of sanctions, where we see that once sanctions are implemented, they tend not to be very effective, but that's not because necessarily sanctions are not effective, but rather a lot of their effectiveness is seen before they're actually ever implemented. So always be skeptical when someone is just looking at the dependent variable and trying to explain how things may be useful or not useful by only looking at that sort of data. All right, that's all I have. I'm done with this course. If you liked this course, I encourage you to check out a couple of my other courses. I have an International Relations 101 course, which would be very useful. In fact, it's kind of a prerequisite when I teach this in person. You're supposed to have taken International Relations 101 before you take this course. So if you liked the ideas of war and conflict and international studies, then that's definitely the course for you. I suggest clicking on that IR 101 right there, and you can go learn about that. And if you like the modeling aspects of this, the game theory aspects, the learning about bargaining, that sort of thing, well, then you should go to the link on the right. That's Game Theory 101. It's a great course. It's my favorite course. It's the first course I did. I've actually revised it a few times, and it is awesome. So I encourage you to check that out. In any case, thank you for making it this far, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in a future course. Take care.